Hope the turnout's better than this.
I know, right? Oh, there we go.
Hello, Sue.
Hi. You look like you're ready to go out on the tundra, buddy.
Well, it was a chilly little rain today, so I have on
It was
a golfing layer here that is quite nice. So
yeah, this weather.
I meant to send you a screenshot I took today of a paragraph in Melissa's book. I've been starting to read that as I read this as well. She's got a whole chapter on their Southwest adventures together, and I thought it was helpful. I may see if I can go ahead and send that to you, but I don't know that I'll read it for the whole crew. But
It's I read an article, maybe she wrote the article before the book that talks about same thing. It's like a whole chapter.
mm-hmm.
So it may be the same, but it was really interesting about the ways in which they collaborated.
Yeah.
This was an
article. I mean, her whole project is that Lewis, was seen as the domestic, she was quoting one of the biographers says every captain needs a first mate. And, she was like, wait a second, this woman is a major editor of magazines, right, and all of the manuscripts bears the imprint of her pen. So that this work is, clearly it's Cather's, but she has a hand in shaping it, and they're experiencing so much of this together as well.
I agree.
And I think it's actually really, really significant work that Melissa's doing. So
Me
that's,
too.
And it's always kind of fun when in your mind, the picture you have as her as a sophomore, when you're a senior and the president of the student council, and she's that girl with that little mop hair over there. It's really, really pretty fun. So, yeah.
Well, she just went out there and became somebody.
Yep, she sure did.
Oh, look, we got a good crew.
We do. Glenn, you got the link tonight. I'm so glad for that.
It takes a while, a few times.
I don't know what happened last week, but I finally got on. Thank you.
Sure. Glenn, one of the things I wanted to mention to you, we've got a relatively new member who has joined since you arrived. Named Bev Wells. And she lived down in Durango for a time.
Oh.
And would love to, she's in one of my classes on Tuesday night, and I mentioned you to her. She, if you all were in church together, I would make sure you met, but I need to make sure you all get a chance to meet each other.
Look forward to that.
I had totally forgotten to, until I was reading Melissa's book, how close the the big pueblo is to Durango. I had not realized my geography of the Southwest is not that clear, and I'm going to be out that way on sabbatical and thinking that I might try to run by and see that.
But are you
that
thinking more
place.
in terms of Mesa Verde and
Yeah,
dwellings? Because that's the assumption of where the Pueblos,
Yeah.
Pueblo peoples fled out of in the massive drought, and then began to build their Pueblos along what rivers were still available.
yeah.
Mesa Verde's worth the trip.
It sure is.
Well, what's our time? I think our time is upon us. I imagine that there'll be some others to join us, but want to go ahead and give you ample opportunity to teach tonight. Welcome, Beth. We're glad you're here, and the Crabtrees and Glenn and others. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. I think it's probably a good idea that.
Okay, but Guy, can you allow me to share something? Do you know how to do that? Okay, let me see if I can share this. Hold on. Okay, it's coming. I said last week, all right, now let's see if I can share. Oh, this is complicated, doing it this way. Okay, hold on. That's
There you
not what
go.
I wanted to share.
Oh, well, that's something.
Okay, can you see a picture?
I see text.
Okay,
Yeah.
hold on.
I see text, not a picture.
All right, hold on. This is so annoying. I wanted to go back. Oh, here we go. Now, can you see the picture?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I wanted to go back and Glenn had mentioned the title. And so I wanted to kind of go backwards because we did the prologue, but I want to go back and then forward. But Cather said that she chose the title based on this 14th century series of woodcuts called Dance of Death, and it's by this guy Hans Holbein. And the relevant image that she is referencing is this one, where you have this skeleton grabbing this ornately robed bishop. And so she picks this picture that's called the Dance of Death. What do you make of this? What do you make of it?
Well, there's a lot of images of death that are personified. I see death. I feel death coming. There's a lot of that in some of that old literature.
Well, I think you got the bubonic plague going on right through here at some point.
That's right.
That would really influence your thinking.
And so it's actually a series of woodcuts, and there are 34 people from various levels of society. And death is intruding upon this place. And sometimes he will sneak up on someone. Sometimes it's a violent confrontation. And other times, as you see with the bishop, he's just grabbing him. And this is also, I think this all matters because she's this smart. The year before he made those woodcuts, he had illustrated Martin Luther's translation of the New Testament into German. And so he was very interested in church reform, especially the Catholic clergy. So in this woodcut, he is, and Hank is right, you kind of have this medieval theme of death, often in the form of, you know, the plague, but it's in the form of a dance. And some of the characters are horrified, but some of them are stoic. So if you think about, so Willa Cather said, this is where I got the title. So can you all think of ways in which this might apply to the novel itself?
Well,
I don't know. What do you think?
life in some of those places was tenuous. It was difficult. And probably death was a big part of the, I would say death would be a big part of any community.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you notice in the novel as it moves forward is that death appears in many forms. And I'd like, if we can, to at least get through the scales section. Do you remember Buck scales? And the wife that
Oh, yeah. Magdalena.
Right.
Magdalena.
Yes, Magdalena, very good. And so is this book making some comment about death? Or is it the church? Or is it, I mean, there are so many ways in which it can be applied, but it's completely ambiguous. And I'm pointing this out because as you go through the novel, you are going to see death appear in various forms. And then, of course, eventually, death comes to the Archbishop, or death comes for the Archbishop.
I think
Those
the
are
personification is the one, it's the for part that is so striking.
Well,
I mean, there's somebody that it's out there, and we don't know who it's going to come for, or when, or how, or in what form.
I agree with Beth, and that's hard for me, Beth, to agree with you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, darling.
But I think your term personification is a good one and very apt. Hank's heard just a little of this, but I'm going to expound on it. I went to a Catholic funeral Saturday, and I don't know that I'd ever been to one, maybe way back, but at any rate, it's fresh in my mind. And one of the things that really struck me in this service, and it was, I would say, not having a lot of experience with funerals generally, but certainly not Catholic, but it seemed to me that the message that was being conveyed to us, the living sitting there, is that death is just a continuation of life. It is not terminal at all.
Mhm.
And that really came through to me in that service. Now, you all can decide whether that's right or wrong and whether that's relevant to this story we're studying, but I think it is relevant. So you got that.
Well, I think the Presbyterians have put the same sort of thing into their services too. In some way, not the same way the Catholics do, but there is a sense that it's the finality is not part of the deal.
Yeah, here, I think you're dead on. Well, that was a bad choice of words. I think you are correct in the sense that, and I'm not kidding when I say, the thing about Cather is that when people read her, they often come away thinking she's a very quiet sort of writer. And she herself commented about this novel when the novel first came out and critics were saying, we don't know how to classify this book. And she's like, don't try to classify it. It's a narrative. And she says, for her, it was like bouncing from one cloud to another. And so there's a lot of stuff packed in there. She is a subtle writer, and I want you to keep your eyes on the ways in which death comes into this environment in all of its many forms. And you're absolutely right, it's personified. And historically, when death is personified, it's always, you know, a skeleton, a grim reaper. It seems to have these evil connotations, things that are really frightening. And I don't know if that's what she's suggesting in this novel. Certainly, she's dealing with the transience of life. But one of the things I really wanted to kind of hone in on tonight is how she works with what's called the quotidian. What does that word mean? Do y'all know?
Every day.
Yes.
Dailiness.
Yes.
Warp and woof of everyday life.
Exactly. And the ways in which this life that they have chosen / been assigned, the vicar and the bishop, much of the detail of the action is always cast in this sort of quotidian nature, like this is what life is like every day. And so you're not going to get a lot of honing in on super violent dramatic scenes, though they're in the background and people will talk about them. And so I think the way she is talking about death fits into that same kind of ordinariness that's going on here, that she's establishing from the beginning. Does that make sense?
Well, it seems like it's familiar.
Yes. And my gosh, is it not?
Is it not? Yeah.
In this place in particular, that is so
Stark.
difficult. Yeah. I mean, it's so harrowing, just surviving. And this idea of survival becomes essential as we get into the actual novel, and we have our two main characters traveling and acquiring, the donkeys. They're surrounded by people who are struggling with what they have to survive. At the same time, they are using their experience in the world as they know it to make their religious evaluations. Yes?
Mm,
Here's-
yeah, but
Go ahead, Beth.
they're funny. One set of them says we have everything we need.
Yes.
We have plenty of food. We know how to cook it. We know how to find it. We know how to take care of ourselves. And then on the other hand, they end up having places where there's no water, or they get lost in the desert, or whatever happens. So there's this stark contrast between, and they seem satisfied in some ways with where they are.
Yes.
But it's still scary.
Doesn't Paul say, famously, he knows how to abase and how to abound? It seems that the two of these folks are, leaning into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They got to be very different takes on it.
And
I also think it's just a simple thing of, you're not poor unless somebody tells you you're poor. If everybody around you has the same thing that you have, you're not poor.
well, and this kind of goes to one of the essential issues in the
Poor is not a word that they use, is it?
No, and that
we
may
would
be a
use
bad
it.
choice
We
of
would
words.
use it, but that's not the way they look at it. They talk about being sustaining or not sustaining, maybe.
right. And so this goes to, at the beginning of the novel, the way in which she sort of pushes in this subtle way and asks this very, very difficult question about, because the vicar is desperate to get in there and marry all those people. Yes.
And baptize them. And
Why
Here
does he
goes.
want them to be married?
So the children will be legitimate? I don't know.
Yes. And the people in the village go along, but they think it's silly. Yes.
Well, they go along when they figure out it's not going to cost them anything.
Yes. And they're like, well, the guys are out in the field. I'm getting ahead of myself here. The guys are out in the field working. Can't we just marry them later? And,
Yeah,
the
they've been
vicar's
living together for years.
no.
Yeah.
He wants them married before the next day,
Yeah.
before he baptizes the children, so that they'll at least be married one night before the children are baptized. What's that about?
Is
Because
it,
I think it's
is
a
it
big
trying to
deal.
put other Western expectations on a civilization that doesn't go by that? In other words, he's taking the Western view, which is that people should be married first and then have the babies, and that's not the way they see it.
Yeah, well, they live so close to the land where those kinds of luxuries are
Okay.
not available to them. Yes.
Mhm.
So
Well-
they just go ahead and procreate. And they're totally fine with getting married, but they do think it's a little silly to get married after.
Mhm.
But maybe also that they see themselves as married, just they didn't have the religious ceremony.
Okay.
You know?
Marriage
they-
doesn't have the
Well,
doesn't have
commitment,
the trappings that we put on it.
Okay, so we're getting into it. So here's the essential conflict in the novel. On the one hand, these leaders of the church go in and they recognize on some level, at least in their perception, the desperate conditions that these people live in. And it's not even a matter of poverty, but when you get to Magdalena, you know, this idea of this woman being hideously abused, and he'd already killed some other people that are in the yard. And they fundamentally believe what they are able to offer through the ritual and the construction of the church, a way of imposing order that will allow these people to progress. Now, what do you think of that?
I think they're trying. I think they're doing the best they got with their belief system and the way they think things work. And you can't ask a lot more than that.
Well, I'm always looking for signs of progression in the native people that they're dealing with. So how do you measure whether or not they're making any progress? I mean, whether the missionaries are making any progress, I don't see a whole lot of evidence of that.
To the Catholic Church, these people were uncivilized. And, and part of being civilized is being educated and trained in the rituals of
church
society and all of that. And until that happened to them, they were lost from the standpoint of these missionaries.
That's kind of like the Poisonwood Bible too, isn't it? I mean, it's the same sort of
Absolutely.
somebody going in there and putting this other thing on top of a people who,
Well,
the
these
funny
people
thing
didn't think they were lost.
when they vote.
Didn't think they were lost. I mean, they
They
thought they were perfectly found.
But I think that, you know, when we think about this, you might want to think about it from let's say we're talking about 2022 planet Earth, and we have this vaccine or we have this medicine, and we go into Africa with it, or we go into Colombia or Peru or Northeast Tennessee, and it's not a construct to us, it's reality. This stuff, this medicine, this science stuff really works. And I think it's that level of faith, that level of belief or whatever that our hero has.
Yeah, I agree, Hank.
I think one of the things in the part of the book that we were to read for tonight is the Resurrection of Magdalena.
Yes.
Is a very sort of positive understanding of what happens to the church.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And so I think one of the gifts of this book is to, you know, we started last week talking about the business of the church versus the gospel of the church. And in the Magdalena story, we see the gospel of it.
Absolutely.
And yet in the conversation with Kit Carson, you know, and Kit saying, you know, I wasn't raised with faith. I did it because my wife, but when I was sick out in California, golly, you know, I came close and it means something to me now. And this is a good priest, but you know, some of those other priests, they're not so good. And so I'm finding as I read it, more sympathetic than say Poisonwood Bible is to the church.
Yeah, the problem in the Poisonwood Bible is that the father is so fanatical and probably cuckoo, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Whereas here you have these two men, and I agree with Guy, and that's why I say it's the central conflict, because she's not bashing you over the head with it. She is sort of pushing you into this complexity and showing you so many layers of it. Because as Guy said, yes, the resurrection of Magdalena is this beautiful story. And then you also have Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is also, is that right? Did I just say that right?
Thank
Yeah.
God.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think so.
Which is also beautiful, yes, and sort of miraculous. And then you have the sort of really rough hewn images of Mary that the more native people have carved, that the vicar finds absolutely beautiful and moving, in the sense that, again, they are using the materials at their disposal that
Right.
in some ways may lend to a greater authenticity than all of the fancy stuff coming over from Europe. So I think you're right. The other thing is, you know, you've got to see the conflict here, bringing in something new. And remember that the people here, apart from the natives, at least in the narrative, they think they're Catholic already. Yes, they think they're Catholic already. And so there are so many things wrapped up in this very subtle episodic movement from one place to another, bringing the church into the new world. And let's be clear, it wasn't just the Catholics, you know, the Protestants had the same attitude of civilizing the natives, the savages, and certainly the Pilgrims and Puritans didn't see any difference between church and state. That is, the church was the state. The rules are all in the Bible.
But
And go ahead.
yeah, excuse me. And I know you're not ignoring this, but there is a clear, to me, progression of the faith of the two fathers, the bishop and as they absorb
Yes.
the local
Ethos is the virgin
customs
before.
and
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. All right, so let's move into it. When you begin the book one, you have the Latour is lost, yes,
Mhm.
which is probably meaningful, yes. And this whole first chapter, the cruciform tree, do you remember that?
Yep.
Where he's wandering in these desert-like conditions and doesn't know where he is. And how is this whole little chapter, how does it sound to you? What does it cast like?
The burning bush. He's out in the wilderness and he turns aside and sees this strange phenomenon, and lo and behold, maybe it's the Lord talking to
Well,
him.
he's lost.
Yes, but who does he think of?
Oh,
I'm on page in my book. My book looks like this. I don't know what y'all's looks like.
yeah, mine does too.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'm on
Right.
page 18. It's like the second page of that chapter. So
Are you
he's
talking
in,
about him thinking about his animals?
okay, let's look at the bottom of 18, if you have this edition, or Guy, I don't know what edition you have. I don't know how your pages are numbered.
When you're thinking of the Virgin Mary,
All right, look at this. Let's do it together. I'm on the bottom of 18, which is probably around the second page in this chapter. Under his buckskin riding coat. You find that?
Uh-huh.
Got it?
Yep.
He wore a black vest and the cravat and collar of a churchman. A young priest at his devotions and a priest in 1,000, one knew at a glance. His bowed head was not that of an ordinary man. It was built for the seat of a fine intelligence. His brow was open, generous, reflective, his features handsome and somewhat severe. There was a singular elegance about the hands. So he's a man of gentle birth. And he is going into this unfamiliar territory, this terrain that for him is so harsh. And on the one hand, you totally get the connection. He's lost in this place. He's new, he's the stranger, he's the wanderer. On the other hand, he, at least according to the narrator, is different from these people. He is intelligent. He obviously has this very civilized upbringing, and he's been out for so long that all he can think about is how thirsty he is. I'm on the next page 20 for me.
Uh-huh.
And it says, he reminded himself of that cry wrung from his Savior on the cross.
Ooh.
I thirst. Of all our Lord's physical sufferings, only one, I thirst, rose to his lips. The passion of Jesus became for him the only reality. The need of his own body was but a part of that conception. So what's happening right there?
Well, he's totally unprepared for what he's doing. So we got to start there. So he falls back on what he does know, which is his training and his scripture, his ability to pick out important things to him at the time. And thirst is a big deal when you're lost in the desert. I mean, that's what you're going to think about.
Is
And
he
look
facing
at,
death?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is he facing death?
Okay, good. So here you have that first sort of brush with death, perhaps. But y'all look at what he is going through. Remember, when we saw him in Rome, you know, they're surrounded by these luxuries and every sort of need is taken care of. And now he is in a place that is desolate, at least to him.
And he's alone.
Yes. And he says, I thirst. But he says the passion of Jesus became for him the only reality. The need of his own body was but a part of that conception. So I think we are going to what John had mentioned earlier, that from the very beginning of this journey for Latour, he is having to experience the Bible and the gospel in ways he never has before.
No.
And so how is that going to impact his ability to make a Catholic church in this land? Because look what he tells you on the next page. He's talking about how he actually gets there in the first place, and he decides it's too dangerous to go by land because of the Comanche Indian raids. So he decides he's going to go by boat. Then there's a boat wreck. And what's the only thing he saves?
His best.
His books. which he saved at the risk of his life.
Yeah.
So you're starting to sort of get a picture of young Latour, the rather refined and civilized leader of the church, going
Sue,
into
do we
this
want to
place.
say anything about his name? Isn't it the Tower?
Yes.
Yeah.
What about that guy?
Well, I just think, you know, as you're reading the shipwreck and all of that, I was hearing the Apostle Paul, and you know, all of that kind of imagery there, and certainly, you know, this tower of strength, the tower of learning, the tower of light. There's all of that that comes in, and of course, Valiant is the other name. So, you know, one English teacher that I've had over the last 16 years keeps telling me to pay attention to names. So I thought
Very
about that.
good.
Guy,
Yes.
you have had a wonderful teacher.
Well, and the thing about the tower is it goes in a million directions,
Yeah.
because it could absolutely be connected to Paul, but then there's that whole Tower of Babel,
Mhm.
Yeah.
where you have all these voices and no one is speaking the same language. Yes.
Right.
And there's chaos and confusion. And so what you're seeing at the very beginning is Latour starting out, and you're watching from the very first little chapter of the book, the ways in which he doesn't fit in and the ways that he can make that happen eventually. Because look what he says. I'm on page 22 now. It's a very interesting paragraph right before the break, where it says, the young bishop was not alone in the exaltation of that hour. Beside him rode Father Joseph Valen, his boyhood friend, who had made this long pilgrimage with him and shared his dangers. The two rode into Santa Fe together, claiming it for the glory of God. Mr. Davidson, is that problematic for you?
At a lot of levels, we do need to be very careful, because she doesn't give us any insight at this point. They're just two Catholic priests wandering in the wilderness. They are very different characters.
Oh, yes.
And the way they experience this mission work is very different. And she'll open that up slowly in the course of the book. And I did have the question myself, which one is the better missionary?
Agreed.
And that I still hold in abeyance. I'm not sure. So
I'm not sure either. What about these two young bucks riding in and claiming Santa Fe for the glory of God?
Now, I wondered when this happened. Is it chronologically after the missions that are all dot California?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But this is much later than that. So they'd already been claimed for the glory of God.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're just going to go straighten them out.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, because the people were afraid of the Spanish and felt like they hadn't been treated well.
I think one of the things that's important here is to realize that as far as the impact of Rome, even the impact of Mexico City had been silent for almost 170 years.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the coming of Latour or Lamy is reclaiming the, and the emphasis on reclaiming rather than claiming because
Beautiful.
the Spaniards, when they first came, going all the way back to Coronado, had made their claim and on Santa Fe. So for me, what is so powerful here, and it is, while it doesn't, she doesn't really become that distinct about it, is that there is a real tension that's going on between the Kiva religion, which is of the earthiness of the Pueblos, and the heavenly religion, which Latour is bringing. And
Yes.
that tension gets played back and forth as she's describing the geography.
Absolutely beautiful. And you are so right when you say, and here's the thing. I think based on the things that Cather said about the novel, that she was aware of not pushing in directly on these questions. And for some critics, especially critics that are working right now, see it as this huge weakness on her part, this unwillingness, as they interpret it, of her to take on the colonization and neo-colonization of all of these people. But you are right. I actually really appreciate the tension, because tension is something that you can either push into or step back from. But you're also a trillion ways right in the sense that, and that's what I meant earlier, I probably didn't say it very gracefully, where these people already think they're Catholic, a lot of them, right? There has been this presence, but it has been unheard of and so separated from whatever this new idea of America is, that you have these men going in saying, we're just going to get this place in order. And what you have to figure out as a reader and a human being is, okay, is that fine? Right? Is that okay? Or is it too much? There was something else I was going to say.
It's the whole nation building thing that we were talking about.
Well, and
Yes.
there's still the presence of native religion too.
Yes.
To deal with.
Well, what you have is this syncretic religion where the people that actually live in this space and live together, things begin to intersect and things and this is another tension or problem in the novel. Has the priest's idea of Catholicism become so thinned out that it is no longer effective? Columbus in the New World, the first thing he did was say, I
claim
this in
Yeah.
the name of
Spain.
God and the crown.
Y'all, it's the same thing that the Israelites did.
Yes.
Exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Same
But
issue.
I think the motives are different. I think the Spanish and the Catholic Church had a pure motives. I could be wrong.
I can't hear him.
You could
He
be
said
wrong,
he thinks
Hank.
that the Spaniards and the Catholics' motives were more pure. Was that what you said?
That's what I said. But let's say it this way. Let's say less venal.
Then,
And the Hebrews?
whoa,
Is
Whoa.
that what you're saying? Or
I don't
or
want to
then
argue
Columbus?
at the temple about that.
Less,
Here's what I would say.
VENAL. Less
Here's what I
Venal.
would say.
So
That
one
is a
thing-
really debatable question.
See,
Columbus was motivated by money.
Absolutely.
And, you know, part of when Columbus, you know, came to the New World, he was promising riches and gold for the coffers of Spain. And when he didn't find any, he said, well, look at all these souls here. Look at all these natives. And, you know, you really, literally, he said this in a letter, Hank. He said, listen, you guys might need a lot of these souls because of that little Inquisition thing you had going on.
Might be some bills to pay.
So here's the bigger question, I think, because I don't think John Bailey's wrong. This is a repeated pattern of nation building, no matter what time or space. And what you have to do is sort of weigh what are the good and positive things that can come from carving out a civilization and a church, and what are the potential detrimental things. And I think this goes back to what Guy was saying earlier. We can, you know, point out all the difficulties and bad things. And at the beginning of their journey, at least with Latour, he comes at this from a very ethnocentric position. That, you know, he talks about the Indians and they're, you know, sort of savagey and dirty and everything. You know, the vicar does that too when that guy says, why don't you go down and trade your horse and you might be able to get a deal, and he's like, no, those people aren't, you know, they're shifty. And so he's ethnocentric at the beginning.
One of the funniest things to me about the vicar, but I think it's telling too, is how he's constantly complaining about the food.
Yes.
I mean, how can you live without leeks? You know, what a bourgeois thing, you know, and no, I've got to roast my lamb. I can't.
I've got to cook it myself. Yeah.
But to me, it points out that huge divide that between the religion here and the religion they're bringing, and do they really have an idea of what they're getting into?
No.
I think Ray.
Religion.
Okay, go ahead, John Bailey.
You used the term a couple of minutes ago, Sue, syncretism.
Mm-hmm.
That was exactly the challenge that the Israelites faced when they went into Canaan, and there was already a religion in place there. And how did they fit their religion into this foreign land that they were ready to take over? Because they were called to do it.
And in this case, it's not just that the vicar is Catholic, he's French. And he makes that clear over and over and over again. And all right, so go a couple of pages past where you are. In my book, it's 27, because I think we're leading to this question. And all of the things we've talked about, I think, can be summed up this way. And my paragraph begins, they say in Albuquerque. Latour says, perhaps you have guessed that I am a Frenchman. No, they had not, but they felt sure he was not an American. Jose, the elder grandson, had been watching the visitor uncertainly. He was a handsome boy with a triangle of black hair. They say at Albuquerque that now we are all Americans, but that is not true, Padre. I will never be an American. They are infidels. Not all, my son. I have lived among Americans in the North for 10 years, and I found many devout Catholics. The young man shook his head. They destroyed our churches when they were fighting us, And now they will take our religion away from us. We want our own ways and our own religion. Father Latour began to tell them about his friendly relations with Protestants in Ohio, but they had not room in their minds for two ideas. There was one church, and the rest of the world was infidel. And here is where you get this cognitive dissonance, right? This idea that, I mean, one question here that rises above is, okay, what is an American?
Right, this is what I said last week, is that he keeps referring to people as he wants to make them not good Catholics, but good Americans.
Yeah, what does that even mean at this point, right?
Yeah, if you're there for the Catholic Church, why do you want to make people good Americans? You want to make them good Catholics, right? But maybe not.
Well, I don't know that he sees that as particularly different, but also when he talks about his good experiences with Protestants, there is, and I think this is what John is moving towards or sort of emphasizing, is that he's not completely close-minded, and you're going to see the way in which he evolves. But at the same time, at the beginning of the journey, he has very clear and explicit ideas about what is right and what is wrong. Not only about the church, but food, as you say. And one of the things I love about Willa Cather is that she does allow this to be kind of comical, yes? I mean, what kind of fool goes in there and goes, okay, lady, strike up the oven. I'm sick of your stew. I'm just going to have myself a little loin, you know?
Or the story about the two white horses or the two white mules.
Yeah.
Great story.
All right. A couple more things I want to point out because we have so much further to go. I'm going to set you up. First of all, on page 29, like a page further, Latour says, when he finds the crucifixion tree, he says, it was a miracle. But his dear Joseph must always have the miracle very direct and spectacular, not with nature, but against it.
Yeah.
And this may end up becoming very important in terms of trying to distinguish between these two priests. Now, for next time, I really want to push into the relationship between these two men, what they are like together, what kind of friendship they have, brotherhood they have. I do want to look at the scale scene just for a minute, but I think for next time, if we can get through the Mass at Acoma, that would be great. Is that how you say it? I'm just looking at the accent mark. Somebody may know better.
Acoma.
Yep. Which is book 3. Get through book 3, which is like halfway. Can you do it?
Sure.
Sure.
And let's remember, we are all serving the Lord. We are all Americans.
Oh, gosh. Ah!
And we all believe in the vaccines, Hank. All right, you guys, go have a week. Keep reading. You're doing beautifully. Don't get your nerves torn up because it's going to be fine. Okay? All right, you guys, be kind. Be kind to all the different weirdos.
Good night. Hank Abbott, congratulations on Vanderbilt's win.
Oh,
Thank you.
bye, y'all. See you next week.
Bye.
Love.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.